Hello, I'm Hagen Rogers with Watermark Advisors, and today we're going to continue our M&A stories with a very interesting one on contingency payments. The story of Flamel Technologies acquiring Eclat Pharmaceuticals. So in 2012, Flamel Technologies had a market cap of $180 million, and they specialized in drug development and drug delivery, and they announced the acquisition of Eclat. Flamel's specialty drug delivery refers to the process of controlling the release of therapeutic proteins and other molecules during the injection process. Eclat's core competencies included drug development, approval, and eventual commercialization. Through the acquisition of Eclat, Flamel gained access to Eclat's only product on the market, called Hyset, which was a pain medication, in addition to 3 separate drugs that were in the R&D process. The transaction structure was a 100% contingency payment, which was made up of a $12 million seller note, which made up 18% of the purchase price, stock warrants, which made up 7% of the purchase price, and an earnout tied to the performance of Eclat's drugs, the one in the market and the 3 that were going to market, whereby Eclat would receive 20% of the gross profit for the life of those drugs as long as Flamel owned those drugs. That made up 77% of the purchase price. So everyone thought, as we always do, there's a bright future ahead. And the 3 drugs that were in R&D were launched. Bloxaverx in 2014, Vaxculep in 2015, and Adcovaz in 2016. They were successfully launched and the future looked bright. However, Flamel, as they launched these products, did see an uptick in performance after Vaxculep and Adcovaz hit the market. But immediately after all 3 of the products were in the market in 2017, the revenues plunged. The acquired assets of Eclat were not performing like either of the parties expected, which had a significant negative impact on the earnout. So the earnout payments were intended to be perpetual as long as the assets remained part of Flamel. The problem is what happens if these products don't perform as expected. And what we see here, the actual earnout received by Eclat plunged after it became clear that the launch products were not performing. So in order to stay afloat, Flamel had to sell off the assets in 2020. And the sale of those products marked the end of Eclat's perpetual earnout agreement. So really we ended in a really much worse scenario than anticipated. Next, the warrants. The warrants were tied to Flamel's stock price. So back in 2015, in July of 2015, Flamel's stock price had been $22.90. These were European warrants, meaning Eclat can only exercise these warrants at the end of the duration of the warrants, which was 2018. Unfortunately, Flamel's stock price tanked from $22.90 in 2015 to $2.88 in December 2018. And they were actually only able to exercise 1.1 million of the warrants. They left another 1.1 million shares worthless. So in total, here's the potential results, and here are the actual results. The potential, they did capture the seller note. The warrants, which were valued at 35.5 full value, only achieved 1.1 million. And the earnout tied to the performance of the drugs, 150 million potential, ended up only being 120. This is a difference of over $63 million, and that meant that Eclat only captured 68% of their purchase price. So, what are the lessons learned? For the seller, it's all about leverage, and it's really all about the decisions you make in what I call a preparation phase. This is our M&A bridge, the steps we take our clients through on the sell side, which in these 3 phases of preparation, transaction, integration. 40 to 45% of deals recently have had contingency payments. Why? because the bid and the ask between the buyer and the seller, the gap in valuation is so wide that in order to close that gap and get the deal done, the advisors have to structure in contingency payments. The real question is, why does a seller settle on negotiating with a buyer that is asking for 30% or 40% in contingency payments or more? The risk is really high to the seller. So here are a few steps in how to mitigate that risk, that very significant risk. One, to the seller, why are you negotiating with one buyer when you have the option to open up to a broader process? We see this time and time again. You immediately give up leverage right out of the gate with negotiating with one party. There are ways to mitigate that risk, but and they can work, but it's a higher risk. Having multiple buyers at the table is your greatest leverage. Second, sell the timing of when you sell. You want to sell at a time because you're going to be putting forth projections to the buyer. You want to put forth those projections when you're very confident about the performance of the business in the current year and the next year and perhaps the next. If this is a more speculative projection, the contingency payments are likely going to show up and the risk increases. Third, have a realistic perspective on valuation. Get a professional valuation specifically for the purpose of M&A. Fourth, and finally, the hardest part of the deal where the risk, the leverage could be lost is when you're in the exclusivity period with one buyer. After the letter of intent is signed, buyer is doing extensive due diligence, which can often uncover red flags that they use to chip away at terms like the purchase price contingency payments. So the more the risk is, the higher the contingency payments the buyer will negotiate. We mitigate that for our clients way back here in the preparation phase, where we will simulate with collaborative partners financial, tax, operational, legal, HR due diligence, IT, IP, so that when you're at actual due diligence, you hold the leverage and therefore we're not at risk of higher contingency payments. I hope this has been helpful to you. Contingency payments are a major issue we deal with clients year in, year out. And by mitigating that risk, you set yourself up as a seller for a much better path to close. Thank you.